everyone. Over the Christmas break, my family and I went to Baohong on the coast of the mainland of Thailand. On one of the days, we enjoyed an afternoon and evening cruise on this magnificent pirate ship. The day involved sailing and snorkeling and ended with a magnificent sunset and dinner on board the ship. To remind me of this day, I am going to sketch and paint this Nemo fish. I hope that you will sketch and paint along with me. Supplies for today's sketch: I've got a pencil and eraser, Pigma Micron permanent liner pens in size 5 and 8, round brushes in size 4 and 8, masking tape to tape my paper down, tissue paper, spray bottle, palette of paints, water, and a palette for mixing. The paper I'm using today is Baohong 100% cotton paper, 300 GSM, in about a size between A4 and A5, and I'm going to masking tape it to the table. I'm going to start by doing a pencil sketch of the fish. You can follow along with me with the sketching, or if you would prefer, the free downloadable and traceable reference sketch is available on my website or by following the link in the description box below. I'm starting with the fish's head and beginning with the inner line of the white ring that goes around its face. Then I'll add the outer line of the white ring, and because of the angle of the fish's face compared to us, the line is thicker on the left than it is on the right. Once I've got the main white ring around the face, as well as the fin above the head in place, I've got enough now that I can begin to build the sketch up around that. I will start with the fins on either side of the face and then slowly build up the sketch from there. If you are sketching along with me, you can follow along at your own pace, pausing as necessary because obviously this video is sped up. If instead you are choosing to trace the sketch reference, then fast forward this video to about the 5-minute mark, and that's where the sketching will end. I'm going to spray my paints with a spray bottle to activate them, And then with my number 8 round brush, I'm going to start with Hansa Yellow Light. This is a sketch that I'm going to do in multiple layers, and I'm going to start with the lightest color that I can see, and then I will build with the darker colors layer by layer. I will essentially cover the entire area of the fish that is orange with the yellow color as a base color underneath, and then I will build my oranges on top of that in additional layers. I will start by making my mixture of Hansa Yellow Light very watery and lay that down over all of the orange areas first. Making this mixture very watery means that I will be able to lay down a very light layer and that the layer will stay wet for quite a while, giving me the opportunity to move the paints around and drop in some more concentrated yellow in areas that I want to. I want to make sure that I work quick enough that the color that I've laid down does not get an opportunity to dry before I come drop in some more concentrated yellow. This all boils down to water control at the end of the day. I want it wet enough that I'm able to still drop in paint and that I can still move it around, and I don't want it to dry before I get there. I'm confident that I'm able to get all of the yellow down without it drying before I come in and drop in the more concentrated yellow. If you are not confident that you can work as quickly as I can and keep the whole thing moist whilst adding in the more concentrated yellow, this fish is beautifully designed in that it's got different yellow sections that are divided up by the black and the white. So if you want to, you can also work this section by section. Maybe just go through to the end of me working in the yellow and see what I do and where I drop in the more concentrated yellow. And then you can go through and do each yellow section bit by bit in your own pace, and then you won't be rushed for time. I'm going to stop at this point and add in some of the more concentrated yellow, because if you have a look at the photograph that I've shared here, having a look at it from the side, you can see that there is still a glisten to the yellow that I have put down. It's still moist, but it is not quite dry, but I am afraid it is going to begin drying quite quickly. So at this point now, I'm going to add in some more concentrated yellow in the areas of the fish that are the brightest. So I will take it section by section, and in each section where the color is the brightest, that's got quite a bit of a yellow glow to it, that is where I'm going to drop in the more concentrated Hansa Yellow Light. The layer that I have already put down is still wet enough that the concentrated yellow that I drop in will blend outwards, but not so wet that the yellow that I drop in will fill in the entire area. It will mostly stay in the areas that I drop it in, with a gradual blending outwards. Now that I've dropped in the more concentrated yellow in my first areas, I'm going to work in the remaining yellow-orange areas and repeat the same thing. I will make sure that I allow this first layer to dry absolutely completely before I come in for the second layer. If I don't allow it to dry completely, then any color that I put on top is going to mix with the layer underneath, and we don't want it to do that. So whilst that dries, let me show you some video of the magnificent pirate ship that we went on that day. need to decide what orange to use for my first orange layer. I could easily use or modify one of the oranges that are already in my palette, but I'm going to mix the exact color orange that I want using the Daniel Smith Essential Set. I like this orange here on the bottom row, and it is mixed using new Gamboge and Pyrrol Scarlet. I will mist the paints with a spray bottle first, just to activate the paints. I will start with new Gamboge in my palette, and once I've got that in, I will add the Pyrrol Scarlet. I'll keep doing a test on a swatch card until I'm happy with the shade of orange that I've obtained. I am happy with this orange as my mid-range orange color. I will be doing another darker layer to get the shadow areas. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, and then I'm going to work on the fish section by section using the wet and wet technique. I'm going to lay down clean water into each section and then drop the orange color in. I'm going to pay attention to dropping the orange into the most intense orange areas first, and then let the water do the work for me. The water will then blend the orange to the more lighter areas naturally. I don't want the orange to completely cover the yellow areas that I want to be the highlights, so if I see that the orange color goes too far, I can use a clean damp brush, almost dry, to lift the areas in the yellow sections to maintain those bright yellow areas on each part. Once I've done the initial drop-in of orange, I might drop in a little bit more orange in the more concentrated orange areas, just to get a bit more of an orange gradient. I'm not doing too much shading at this point, but if I can put in a little bit of orange in the more intense areas, I will do that. This process of adding one layer of color on top of the other, as we are doing in this sketch, is also known as glazing in the art world. It's a far more labor-intensive process than sitting down and completing the watercolor on a sketch in a single sitting, but it really has its place if you're producing a sketch in which you want some of the colors to really glow and also to shine through from the underlayer. Whilst there are some watercolor sketches that I'd be happy to do on mixed media paper or a wood pulp paper or a paper that is not 100% cotton, I really do find that doing a sketch where we are doing multiple layers like this absolutely must be done on 100% cotton paper if you're going to get the results that you're looking for. Cotton paper really can withstand the multiple layers of paint that we're going to do on it, as we will in this sketch. And also I find with papers like multimedia paper, the underneath layer, although it might look completely dry, what might happen is on layers that you put on top, the layer underneath does loosen up again and often can mix in with the color that you're busy working with. That definitely isn't the case, as you can see here. As soon as one layer is completely dry, it will never lift or mix with the layers that we put on top of it. Having underlayers coming and mixing with the layer that you're currently working with can cause a muddy effect to your colors. Cotton watercolor paper is an entire discussion on its own, and I have done a video having a look at all of the different types of watercolor paper that you can get. I will put a link to that video on watercolor paper in the description box below if you'd like to learn a little bit more about all of the different kinds of watercolor papers there are, as well as the different price points and my recommendations. I find this Baohong paper that I'm working with today to be the best value for money 100% cotton watercolor paper. I really like the grain that the cold pressed paper has in Baohong, and I feel that it performs as well as some of the top priced papers that are available out there. Using paper like this that is much better priced on your pocket makes you more confident and happy to use it to try small sketches here and there, and not to be so precious and concerned about using very expensive paper. Also with this paper, if I'm doing just practicing or a small sketch that I don't plan to frame, I also do paint on both sides. This is also the paper that I use if I make my own sketchbooks, and obviously in that you also do paint on both sides. So being able to paint on both sides of the paper definitely does help to save money as well. As I move around the fish, I'm making choices about which area I choose to work on next. There are some areas that I don't mind touching each other as I'm working because the colors are similar to each other, but there are other areas that I don't want the color from one section to bleed into the next one. I don't mind working from the face and belly area underneath the face right into those fins underneath, as well as to the right of the fish's face, but I'm leaving the one on the left for now because I don't want the darker color that I've put underneath the round white circle to bleed into the fin on the left hand side, because that fin is brighter. So the left hand fin next to his face I'm leaving to a little bit later until more of the sketch is dry before I do that one in orange. I also allow the fin on top of the back to dry before I do the body of the fish, because I didn't want that darker color that I'd put in the top fin to bleed into the body. So now that I feel that the top fin is dry enough, now I'm going to work on the body of the fish. I want to leave the center of his body as yellow as I can, because that will give the three-dimensional curve look to the body if I can leave the center highlight yellow. I also want to make sure that everything is completely dry before I do that left-hand fin next to the fish's face, as well as the fin on the bottom. So I'm going to dry everything off before doing those last two bits. I still consider this to be layer 2 because I'm still working with the same new Gamboge Pyrrol Scarlet mix. I just had a short pause whilst some of the sketch was drying, so continuing on with the second layer now, I'm going to work on the two remaining fins. On the fin on the left hand side of the fish's face, I want to leave the bottom left side of that fin the most yellow, so I will put the darker color at the top and then blend it downwards. And then with the fin on the underside of the belly, I want the darker orange to be at the bottom and blend upwards towards yellow towards the fish's belly. As always happens, I ran out of paint just before the end of this layer, so I did stop to make a little bit more, just making sure that the color matched, and then I was able to finish off the bottom fin. Lastly, I just wanted to put a little bit of light orange on top of the eyelids, but I still wanted the eyelids to be lighter than the surrounding body. For this layer where I'm now going to start darkening the shadow areas, I'm going to use the color Quinacridone Sienna that I already have in my palette. It is the absolute perfect color for this layer, and so I'm going to use it as an already prepared color without adding anything to it. If you don't have this color in your palette, that's not a problem. You can probably add something like burnt sienna to the orange color that you've already made in order to make it a darker shade of that color. Play around with your colors, but I would say add some burnt sienna and maybe a little bit of a darker brown like sepia to darken that color and make it richer. Also, the mix that I'm making of this color in my palette has got a thicker consistency to the color that I worked on in the previous layer. Making it thicker means that it won't spread so far when I put it onto the wet in wet layer, and that is what I want. I want the shadows more isolated towards the shadow side of each section. I am going to work section by section and wet in wet once again. Although I want the shadows to stay more in the shadow areas where I put them down, I still have to wet the entire section each time before I drop the shadow layer in, because if I don't, then I'm going to get a water line mark against wherever I choose to stop the wet on wet layer. So I have to wet the whole of each area with clean water before dropping the shadow layer in. I don't want to put too much water down and make each layer too wet, because I don't want the shadow to run too far. So this is just where a little bit of knowledge of water control and how the water and paint reacts on your specific paper does come in handy. It doesn't matter though if your shadow does run too far, because you can just use a clean brush to lift the color if it does run too far into the yellow sections. And if it does run too far and you find yourself having to lift quite a bit, then you might just have to repeat dropping in the thicker pigment at the beginning of the shadow area, just to intensify that shadow section as much as you want to. I really enjoy this part of the sketch as it starts coming together. We start getting a lot more of a three-dimensional look to the sketch, and the colors really start to pop. The thing that really does give that three-dimensional look to the sketch is pushing the greatest degree of contrasts that we possibly can at this stage in the sketch. By that, I mean I'm really wanting to preserve the lightest part of the sketch that I have already laid down, those bits that are in yellow. I want to try and leave those as far enough alone as I possibly can, and then push the darkest areas of the sketch, the dark shadow areas, as far as I possibly can in that direction. The more range of contrasts that you can get between the lightest lights and the darkest darks on your sketch is going to give you the most impact and the more three-dimensional look to the sketch. So as I add layer on layer, I am always keeping an eye on that first layer that I put down, the lightest yellows, and trying to make sure that any additional layers that I put on don't go near those and move further and further away from the lightest sections so that the lightest sections can be retained. If any of the additional layers that I put down bleed too close to those lighter layers, that is the point when I will use a clean brush to lift those or push that color backwards to retain the lightest parts on the sketch as much as I can. And whilst this layer is still a little bit wet, and before it completely dries, I'm still happy to add in a thicker consistency of this shadow color at the beginning of each of the shadow sections, because that is going to increase my contrast and give me more of a shadow and three-dimensional look. So use the opportunity whilst it is still damp to push that contrast further and to add more shadow section. But if whilst working through the sketch you see that a section is dry, don't add any more shadow to it then, because the shadow won't blend. Like with my previous layer, there are areas that I don't want to touch each other, so I'm going to let this dry before I finish off this layer. Continuing on with this shadow layer now, I want this underbelly section to have the darkest shadow, so I'm really going to push that as far as I can, particularly on the left-hand side, blending it outwards. So I'll lay the water layer down first and then drop the pigment in, particularly putting a lot on both sides and then blending it towards the middle to give that belly a curved look. And then I don't mind if what I've just done bleeds into the fin on the right hand side, because that is also in shadow, so I will go straight onto that one as well as the fins underneath. I will make the shadow the strongest, closest to the fish's belly, and then blend that shadow outwards, leaving the lightest areas as much as I can. And the same with the two small fins underneath. I will blend the shadow from the belly outwards, but leaving the right tips of each fin as light as I can, just so that there's a bit of a gradient to the shadow in these two small fins. Now I will move to the main body of the fish, and as with the previous layer, I really want to leave that yellow in the middle as much as I can to get the curved look to the belly. Therefore, just putting in the shadow color on the two edges and blending it towards the center. And if I need to lift any color towards the central yellow area in order to maintain that highlight color, I'll do so. Now that this layer has dried completely, there are definitely areas that I would like to push darker. I'm going to start under the belly, put a little bit of water down and drop some more of the Quinacridone Sienna in to push that shadow area darker. I'll concentrate again mainly on the two outsides and then blend the color slightly lighter towards the inside just to give the belly a rounded look. At times I'm adding pigment directly from the moistened pan in my palette because it is there that the concentration is the strongest, and therefore I will get the strongest shadow color using that. I'm going to move straight onto the right hand fin now because I don't mind if the one color blends into the other, and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to drop the shadow color closest to the left hand side here, blend it towards the right and avoid the yellow highlight areas as much as I can. And I will do the same for the two small fins underneath. And once more on the main body of the fish, I'm going to do a once over with the thicker consistency of the Quinacridone Sienna, just to push the far edges of the belly to as deep a shadow as I possibly can. I really am working with the paint in quite a thick consistency and then using a clean wet brush to blend it outwards. In this layer, I want to work on a little bit of shadows in the white areas of the fish now. I'm going to mix up a very, very weak solution of Quinacridone purple. You can use any mid-range purple that you've got in your palette. Once I've mixed that up, I'm going to get clean water so that I can put clean water down before I put my shadow in the white area. I want to get that same three-dimensional curve to the white tail section. So I will put plain water down first and then just drop in the purple shadow color on the two edges. I want to make absolutely sure that the inside white area remains and that the shadow is only on the outside. I will do the same for this white band at the top, but I'm only going to put the purple shadow on the top part. Then on the white circle that surrounds the face, I'm going to put shadow on the right hand side and then also put some on that little bit of white that's underneath the belly. Now for the fun part, because this is where the sketch finally comes together. I'm going to start with a 0.5 micron pen, and I'm going to use that to outline the white areas on the outside of the fin. Then on either side of the black part that I'm going to paint in, I'm going to use the 0.8 micron pen. You don't have to use the 0.8 if you don't have one, and 0.5 would be fine. Or even if you don't have a micron pen, you can paint the whole black section in without outlining it first. I just find it easier to keep my black paint in the lines if I outline the area first. Unlike my normal sketches where I outline the entire sketch with the micron pen, I'm not going to do that today because I think that the fish is a more delicate subject, so I'm only using the pen in the white areas and the black areas. In the areas that I'm using the 0.5 pen, on the outside of the white areas, I'm making an effort to keep the lines quite light and a little bit wiggly, so there's a little bit of movement to them and that they're not rigidly straight. You could do all of the black using the micron pen if you wanted to, but I'm going to use black paint directly from my palette to paint in the black stripes. I don't want any transparency to this black at all, so I'm going to use the paint in a thick consistency, slightly watered down and then directly from the palette, and then I'm going to paint that straight into the black areas. Now that that's completely dry, the first thing I'm going to do is just add in the mouth with the micron pen. The next thing I want to do is separate this top fin from the body. At the moment the body and the fin are the same color and I want to separate the two slightly. So I'm going to put some clean water down in the top fin area and then just drop in some of that first orange color that I had mixed. That will give me some distinction between the top of the body and the fin. Now comes the age-old question as to whether we're going to do a background or not. Because this is a tutorial that I'm aiming towards beginners, my suggestion is going to be to not do any sort of blue background. If you've come this far, then there's always the fear that we're going to do something that's going to mess up the work that we've done so far. So I'm not going to do a background, but rather I'm just going to do some splatters to suggest bubbles or water around the fish. I don't want my splatter to go onto the fish, that's why I'm covering it with tissue paper. And then I will use a few of the blue colors that I've already got in my palette. I'm going to get them on my brush in a medium consistency so that they don't dry too light. And then I'm just going to tap it over the sketch where I'd like the splatter to go. When that's completely dry, I'm going to remove the tape. You can see that I do that by lifting the tape and then pulling the tape back on itself at 180 degrees. I find that doing this makes it less likely that it's going to tear the paper, and I just make sure to work slowly so that it doesn't tear. And there's the final sketch. I thought twice whilst I was considering showing you what I'm about to show you, but I thought that it would be encouraging for beginners. When we see tutorials on YouTube, we often think that the artist that is doing them is extremely experienced and is able to get their sketches right the first time, and it makes us a little bit discouraged if we try the same tutorial and we aren't successful the first time. This isn't the first time that I've done this sketch, as I like to prepare before I film a video. But it's not my second or third attempt either, so let me show you what I mean by that. I was planning on one preparation sketch, and to do that I was going to use this Stillman & Burns multimedia sketchbook. I already knew that with this being a multimedia book and not a cotton sketchbook, that I would battle a bit with the layers, but I was really just doing this sketch to prepare the colors that I was going to do, as well as the sketching and the steps that I was planning. From my first attempt, I wasn't happy with the shadow areas. I thought that they were a little bit grey. And so in my second attempt here, which I thought was quite successful, on cotton paper, I chose to not use any shadow color, but rather just to intensify the colors. I should have listened to myself, because this was the first filming attempt that I did, and things were going extremely well until I decided to go off script and try to do a purple shadow instead of what I had already planned in the first place. So this first filming attempt got chucked in the bin. And this is today's fourth attempt. So you can see that on each successive attempt, I've taken what I've learned from the previous attempts and improved on it each time. I think that the brightness of the yellow in the last attempt really does show through, and the decision I've made on what to do with the shadows has given the best result. So I hope that this encourages you to try something more than once if you weren't happy with the first attempt. Take what you've learned and what you don't like about it, and then try and improve it on the next attempt. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, bye for now.